You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Helen Mackenzie, and today is Friday, January the 19th, 2024.
6.
2024 is shaping up to be yet another year when it's going to be difficult to predict what is to come. And that's hard, as in procurement we need to think ahead. So when I'm doing my analysis of the supply market, I try not to focus solely on current market conditions. I'll think about the potential future trends and external factors that could have an impact on the supply chain I'm buying. By endeavouring to stay informed about geopolitical events, technological advances and regulatory changes, because these can have a significant impact for suppliers and their ability to meet demand, procurement can anticipate potential disruptions and opportunities. OK, it's never going to be perfect, but thinking ahead does help to develop a more strategic and resilient approach.
5.
In this week's episode of the Art of Procurement podcast, Philip Ideson spoke to Spend HQ's Andy Moyer, Mitchell Cooper and Robert Birch about procurement's complicated relationship with data. Now, we all know procurement needs good, clean data to make the right decisions for the business, but getting it is at best challenging and at worst an afterthought that never happens. In the excerpt I've chosen for you today, you'll hear what real data maturity looks like, so we know what to aim for 2024. Let's take a listen.
Robert, you mentioned the maturity of kind of data quality, and I wonder if you could share a little bit about what a mature approach to data quality actually looks like. What should we be aspiring towards?
Yeah, completeness is definitely one of the major aspects to it. Timeliness is another. Kind of how systems lock and change, especially in this business, is really important on how fast you want to be reactive or proactive to your data.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two major things I look for. Accuracy just kind of falls into place there, but I'd say timeliness and completeness are kind of, to me, the two most important aspects of it.
How do you think about because when I think about timeliness as well, data ages, and how do you think about when is data no longer useful? Because we're generating more and more data every single day, more than we could ever do anything with. But how much of it is really relevant? Do you set rules about that? Is it time-based, or what are some of the ways of thinking about it?
It's very client-specific, we found. I think we generally look at like a 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
Some clients set it back to a 5-year period. Trends are important, but beyond 2 years, especially when we get into kind of like the COVID timeframe, it really shakes things up.
Yeah.
And so we may have kind of stretched that a little further during that time period, but I think we've almost reset back to where a 2-year view is pretty accurate.
Clearly, time is of the essence when it comes to data accuracy and reliability, and procurement should waste none of it getting the data right. To listen to the full episode, go to artprocurement.com/podcast, search for Art of Procurement and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or click the link in today's show notes.
4.
I've been thinking a lot about ROI in the context of my role at Art of Procurement. Is what I'm doing adding value and really helping to deliver results for the bottom line? Rethinking procurement's ROI was the topic of a recent post by Philip Ideson on the AOP website. Making sure procurement is constantly demonstrating ROI is an effective way to retain our role in the business. Value creation is key, and I'm looking forward to all the webinars, white papers, events, and of course the podcasts that are going to share all the different ways that procurement is doing just that.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Now, for those of you who are up on your supply chain geography, you'll know that any shipping passing through the Suez Canal has to go through the Red Sea. And that's because the Suez Canal is the quickest sea route between Asia and Europe. Now, an estimated 17,000 ships and $1 trillion worth of goods pass through the Suez Canal annually, and that represents between 20 and 30% of all container freight. In this week's episode of the Art of Supply podcast, my colleague Kelly Barner provides an overview of the trouble that has been raging in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, specifically targeting commercial vessels. The disruption in the area is threatening to become an expansion of the military activity that's going on elsewhere in the Middle East, even while it creates a challenge for anybody trying to move cargo through the region. Now, routing around Africa's west coast and the Cape of Good Hope is the best alternative to the Red Sea, and while it adds 10 to 14 days to a trip, carriers like SP Moller-Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd have opted to do just that. $65 billion worth of cargo has already been diverted, and tensions seem to be escalating. So make sure you listen in to this week's episode of Art of Supply for an overview of the situation and how companies are responding.
2.
Procurement professionals often talk about how they fell into the field without a plan. And while this means procurement has a diverse range of skill sets in their ranks, it does leave many teams without a solid educational foundation, similar to what you might find if you're in marketing or operations. In this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, host Kelly Barner welcomes Robert Chaskovich, who's a sourcing buyer for Bugatti Rimac, a Croatian company that develops and produces cutting-edge hypercars. Now, Robert's been in procurement since college, and he's currently doing an MBA with a master's thesis focused on improvements of procurement's processes in the automotive industry. In this podcast interview, Robert talks about the positive impact of studying and working in procurement at the same time. He's going to cover how he's incorporated procurement optimization into his MBA studies, trends and top stories he's monitoring relative to the automotive supply chain, and achieving a balance between strategic suppliers and stakeholders. Listen into the podcast using the link in the show notes.
1.
Now, I don't know about you, but packaging is something where there's been a lot of it in my house recently. The festive season here in the UK does involve a lot of boxes and wrappers, that's for sure. Now, when we think about packaging from a procurement perspective, we usually think of it as indirect spend, but that may be limiting procurement's opportunity for impact. And while packaging is not sold for profit, it has a direct impact on profitability through customer experience, reduced damage and related costs such as shipping and waste. The category also represents a significant opportunity to make progress towards sustainability targets by consuming less material, taking up less space during shipping and storage, and being more recyclable. So it's great that for one of our first live industry webinars of the year, Matt Reddington, Vice President of Packaging and Logistics at Procure Analytics, will be joining Kelly Barner to share everything you need to know to excel at packaging procurement in 2024. Register now by going to artofprocurement.com/calendar.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.